Uh, OL wants to know, when bulking, how long should the maintenance phase be at each weight class? So once I get to 96, how long should I maintain for before I begin pushing to 102?
So the maintenance phases kind of depend on a few different things. One, how fat you've gotten, so how much extra fat you've got. If it was a minimal amount of fat, then you can kind of, give it 3 or 4 weeks. How sick are you of bulking? So from the psychological point of view, how much, has force feeding yourself been an issue? So if you've gotten, some people find it very, very difficult to gain weight. Like the initial few weeks are great fun, and then after like 3 or 4 weeks, they're kind of like, oh, this is kind of shit. But some people get on, a ream of like 2 months because they've restricted their calories for so long. So by the time they get to a bulking phase, it's kind of still a novelty. But mostly you want to be looking at like kind of psychological. So, you want to let that rest for a little bit. If it's gotten to a point where it's kind of negatively impacting your mood, you want to give that a few weeks until it returns to normal, until you're ready to go again. You want to just kind of make sure that if you kind of want to assess those fat levels, so if you've gained a reasonable amount of fat and mass along with it, so hopefully ideally you'd have ways of tracking that through. So like, it's unlikely you have access to a DEXA, but if you could get that done, that'd be useful. Skin fold calipers work very well. You just need something consistent and the same measurement each time. And so if you've accrued an acceptable amount of fat mass during your bulk, then you can go, okay, this is okay. I'll take a maintenance for usually about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and then decide to go again. It could be a little bit longer than that. You also need to assess how your lifting is feeling. If it is weightlifting, for example, I don't think OL was doing weightlifting, but if it was weightlifting, for example, you just need to assess, how is your training going? How is your weightlifting going? Is your technique changed a lot? Is your mobility messed up a bit? Does your mobility need a little bit of time to catch up? So then you need to assess, how is your mobility feeling during this maintenance phase? And then during this maintenance phase, can you get your mobility back up to a standard where it's good enough for your lifts, and then start to push your weight a little bit again? I remember OL saying he had quite a bit of weight to gain. It was something like 90 to like 109. So it's very, very likely that you will have some issues with mobility and some speed and power issues. So you'll need to check that as well. Is your speed and power still appropriate? Is it still moving quite well? And then you'll just kind of assess all these different variables involved in your training. And then once all of these are at a satisfactory place, then you can kind of proceed again. If any of these have dropped off negatively, you need to use this maintenance time, and however long that takes, to just assess these and make sure that they are back up to a level that when you go bulking again, you can make sure that they aren't so far in a deficit that it's very, very difficult for those to be covered up. And you don't want to put those variables in a place where you would have to cut weight to rectify your mistakes from an excessive bulk. For example, the mobility one and the fat mass one would be a huge part of that. So your skill development and your psychological development are okay. They'll go back to normal once you get the maintenance calories at your final weight. But your fat-free mass will have to be, or sorry, not fat-free mass, your fat mass, you'll have to do a cut eventually to get rid of that if you get too much excess of that. And then the mobility one can be very, very difficult and can take quite a long time to rectify if you gain too much weight beyond your ability to kind of remap all that mobility in your brain. So for a lot of people, unless you're phenomenally talented to muscle acquisition, like the American weightlifting team, of course, you're not going to have such a level of muscle mass where it's going to murder your mobility. But some people do experience this, and a lot of people experience this, natural or otherwise, where your power to weight ratio will just kind of be fucked up a little bit when you just gain too much fat, which is obviously linked to the mobility and the fat mass one, where you just get to a place where you're just no longer athletic, and you need to make sure that you are staying athletic. So you need to be playing the long game with your bulking, especially for weightlifting, a athletic sport.
If you wanted a rule of thumb for that, if you're like field sports athlete, around 14% body fat is probably where you want to get down to before you bulk again. I think for weightlifters, 14 to 18% is probably alright. Most of you are probably sitting around 15 to 20%, So when you do go up, you might have to drop back down, hit, like, depending where you're at in terms of like how much you care about aesthetics of your physique, pick whether that's going to be 15%, 18%, 14%, but just pick that number and stick to it. Once you hit that, like the day you hit 96 kilos is the day you start cutting that fat mass back down. Then once you get to 14%, you go up again. It might take you a number of times going between 96 and 102 or whatever it is, but I would definitely pick that body fat percentage that you're going to work at. So there's obviously all the things like girth suspension, mobility, like power to weight ratios, all those things, but also your hormonal system will be much better predisposed to you gaining muscle, gaining strength, improving your motor patterns if you're holding less fat tissue. So fat tissue just fucks with us in a whole number of ways that we don't want to get. So you're doing the right thing going up and using those kind of weight classes as different markers for going up, but I would pick a body fat percentage that you're going to get down to each time before you go back up. And to be honest, I'd say 14% is probably better than most.
DM Hunter 15 asked a relevant question to that. So like, how fat is too fat? For our weightlifters, you can get somewhere in the region of, for our male weightlifters, in the region of about 18%. Anything beyond that, and I think you're just too fat, especially for our natural weightlifters, which is basically everyone watching. 18% is just too damn fat. For female weightlifters, it's probably a little bit more than that, depending on your weight class.
Yeah, definitely.
But typically what we do see, though, with female weightlifters is they're a little bit lower than that, because usually it's not... It's more of a fact that female weightlifters, or just female gym goers in general who take their strength training seriously, usually just end up in better condition and are typically a little bit lower body fat, because they seem to, for some reason, I don't know if it's female athletes respond better to training, or just the particular ones who are involved in the moment across the world, or they just have better discipline, or it's a combination of both of these. There is obviously differences in female physiology, but they seem to be in better condition. So a lot of times you'll see those female athletes between 16 and 18%, even though on average we'll see female athletes a little bit higher, or female or the general population, due to, you know, breast tissue and stuff like that, and differences in hormones. But for most people, if you start seeing 20, you've gone too far. For a person who's reached their final form, their final evolution in terms of your weight class, I'd like to see somewhere around like 14%, maybe 15%.
Yeah.
Anything more than that, and it's kind of like, ooh, it's just a little bit too fat. And I would say just you get more out of it for your weight class.
It's important to note as well that, like, once you start dropping below 12-11%, you're probably losing out there as well, you know.
Yeah.
Like you're leaving some stuff on the table by being too lean in terms of your recovery. So there is a butter zone there. It's not necessarily just hitting lower and lower and lower and lower being better. There's definitely a prime area there in between the two of them.